What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you the initial details of Hunter the Reckoning Deathwish, the recently announced title from the World of Darkness IP, this time utilizing their Hunter the Reckoning TTRPG. In particular, though, this one was announced at the very recent Xbox Partner Preview. What's cool, though, is on top of that announcement, they also dropped a couple of interviews as well as the Steam page for the game, and I was able to, of course, gather up all of that information, which is where I'm getting all of this from, just so you are aware. But before we dive fully into that, I want to kick this off with some of the most important information, starting with the fact that they're aiming for a summer 2027 release, so a little over a year away, but I would imagine that is if everything goes well, because I want to lead this video with this bit, which is that the publisher, or at least the current publisher for this game, is Nacon. If you haven't seen the recent news, Nacon filed for insolvency not that long ago, basically meaning they don't have the money to pay their bills and they had to enter formalized proceedings over it. As a result, some of the studios owned by Nacon have also been having problems and been placed into receiverships, such as Spiders as an example. Now, that doesn't mean they are closed, but it does mean they're having very obvious problems. Now, the one thing that Teon, the developer, does have going for them is that they are not owned by Nacon the way Spiders was. Meaning that if push comes to shove, they could theoretically, find another publisher. But that is obviously very important information going into this. That situation is unstable, I would say, and so something we're going to have to keep an eye on, but I do hope this game actually sees the light of day because it looks very cool. Which is why I decided to go ahead and make this video covering its initial announcement. But to start from the beginning, what is Hunter the Reckoning? Well, if you're unfamiliar, Hunter the Reckoning is part of the World of Darkness IP. An IP which is made up of several tabletop role-playing games. This includes things like Vampire the Masquerade, the most popular one by far, but also things like Werewolf the Apocalypse, Mage the Ascension, Wraith the Oblivion, Changeling the Dreaming, Demon the Fallen, and of course Hunter the Reckoning. Now, where pretty much all of those games deal with a world of darkness, that is a secret supernatural happening kind of behind the scenes of mortal life that is largely kept secret, Hunter the Reckoning is a little more ground level in the sense that it deals with, regular everyday people who just so happen to stumble into knowledge of that world of darkness and follows then what they choose to do about it, which in some cases is fighting back. Which means, as you would expect, these people are vampire hunters, they deal with werewolves and other things like demons even potentially, and any other threat they happen to become aware of. Now, as this is a tabletop role-playing game, probably isn't a huge surprise then that the video game here will be an adaptation of the 5th edition of that rule set. It is not a one-for-one recreation, mind you, but they are, of course, drawing a lot of inspiration from it. But before we dive into some of the specifics of that, I did want to take just a moment to mention that I actually think this is probably a great move for World of Darkness if this game gets released, because you've got the developer, Teon, who's already made some pretty good games, like the recent RoboCop Rogue City, which was actually really good. And you've also shifted the focus away from Vampire the Masquerade a bit, while still tackling a lot of the same subject matter, just kind of on the opposite side of it. That's useful, thanks to, I would say, the very difficult time Vampire the Masquerade has had with video games in general, including very recently with Bloodlines 2, of course, which, not a terrible game by any means, but wasn't a great sequel to Bloodlines. Taking on Hunter the Reckoning here allows them to sort of continue on with that while, kind of leaving, hopefully, some of the baggage of Vampire behind. But obviously, all that hinges on the game actually being released. In any event, Hunter does function a little bit differently. One of the reasons for all the different tabletop versions of these games is that the rules for each, individual being or group of beings in the World of Darkness is obviously a little bit different. Now, in the case of Hunter, to keep it simple, because we don't know exactly what they are adapting and what they are not, it usually comes down to a person becoming aware of the supernatural world, but then also picking up a creed, which is in large part how they are fighting back against the World of Darkness, be that via just their faith. True faith is a thing in this universe. It's a little more complicated than I want to get into in this video, but it's a very cool thing in the universe itself. There are also people simply making crazy innovations to fight these monsters with, people who are learning everything they can about them to study and deal with them appropriately, the way you would hunt much of anything really, and other things as well, these kind of being your creed. Then, on top of that, those characters usually have their drive, the reason they are doing the things they are doing. In some cases, this can be simple curiosity, in others it can be envy of the monsters they are tracking, perhaps wanting to become one of them themselves. But they also have the things that set them above regular human beings as well, which can be typically things like an edge, as an example, which is oftentimes like gear or simple advantages they have in the material world, alongside their specialized knowledge. Now, all of these hunters typically operate in cells, or a small group of the hunters themselves tracking down the threats as they see them. And this setup, I would say, feeds into the two main themes of Hunter the Reckoning, that being something like righteous fury, or stepping into the role of a monster hunter, keeping the world at large safe from these otherworldly beings, from these unnatural beings, and then also paranoia. The problem with becoming aware of the world of darkness as a regular human being means that you are suddenly aware that almost everyone you are talking to could be something like a vampire or a ghoul, and so trust is in short supply. Now, thankfully, from that interview, we do have a few specifics, though not a whole ton to go on, mind you. But we do have confirmation that you will be able to make your own character in this game, though the game itself is first person. According to them, from the interview, it was a pretty robust character creation, but, obviously they're going to say that in an interview, and we'll have to see how it actually looks, but we will be able to make our own character, which is great, and that character is going to be able to pick from things like attributes, skills, and find different ways through situations, which they, from this interview, mentioned comes down to largely like 3 core methods through a problem, that being straight up force, stealth, or, social or mental ways through a problem. In particular, they actually specifically called on Bloodlines 1 as being a lot of the inspiration for this, and it is aiming to be an actual RPG in the vein of something like Bloodlines, which, again, I think that comes with a little bit of baggage they may not necessarily want to be asking for, but it gives you, I think, a good baseline for the idea here. On top of that, the game is apparently aiming to be semi-open world. There is going to be hubs and things you'll be operating out of, it would seem. And while the main story is linear in the sense that, mission by mission, it will have like branching outcomes and things to those individual missions, which in combination with companions and doing their quests alongside potentially romancing them will lead to the game's various end states for whatever the main quest happens to be. And while we don't know too very much about the main quest itself, we do know a couple of details. One, our character, whoever they might wind up being based on our own preferences, is the result of some childhood trauma. There is some event from our childhood that has haunted us throughout our life and made us aware of the world of darkness, and that's why you step into the role of a hunter to begin with. And it looks like at least a good chunk of the game takes place in New York. I did note on the Steam page it does mention going beyond New York and talking a little bit about the East Coast more generally of the US, that is, but it does look like New York plays a pretty central role here. But as for today, and with the announcement and all the information I was able to find following said announcement, that is what we know about this game. I am pretty excited for it. I think this is a really cool opportunity. I, more than anything, just hope the situation with Nacon doesn't drag it down, because that is, at least from the initial onset here, looking to be the only serious problem I could easily foresee coming up. Otherwise, though, this is cool. Expect me to cover it. But as for today, that is pretty much going to do it. Certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.